The leadership exodus from Transnet continues. Siza Mzimela is the latest executive to leave this very important state transport and logistics company. She was the CEO of Transnet's freight rail division, and this follows the resignation of the CEO of Transnet, Portia Derby. Transnet also confirming that the CFO had completed a month's notice earlier. Well, we discussed the situation with Bowmans Head of Ports, Transport and Logistics, Andrew Pike.
I'm afraid it has become worse. We've seen a steady decline, particularly since about 2019, where total rail tonnage has deteriorated by about 30%. In terms of exports, it's cost our sort of commodities mining sector probably 100 billion rand in revenue, and there's no particular end in sight. And if anything, it's getting worse. You've got this plethora of trucks which have taken to the roads, and now that isn't even viable now that the commodity prices have dropped. And so you're starting to see retrenchments from the Glencores of this world, and it's a terrible downward spiral at the moment.
And because of that, she was under huge pressure to resign. Do you see her exit and Portia Derby's exit as a push? Because reportedly it came after the Minister, Pravin Gordhan, asked the board to evaluate their success, evaluate their fitness to hold their positions, essentially.
Yeah, it's difficult to tell. I suspect that Portia's was more of a jump than a push, and Caesar's probably a push. I think I need to put it in some context. I think Portia is a hugely competent human being. I think she may have made some difficult and perhaps wrong decisions, but it's not for want of hard work and not for want of wanting the SOC to succeed. I think that she was ultimately defeated not by her competence, but by simply the scale of what she's got to deal with. And I'm not convinced that the Transnet board understand the scale of what they've got to deal with. TFR the freight rail is sort of symptomatic of the bigger picture, but there are very few operating divisions that are performing well at the moment. One notable exception, funnily enough, seems to be pipelines, and that's where the acting CEO, Michelle Phillips, is coming from. But having said that, the scale of what has to be fixed at Transnet is utterly huge. We have the worst performing container ports in the world, or amongst the worst. Freight rail is almost unfixable without bringing on some private funding and partnership. And so the story goes. Transnet port terminals have their ups and downs, but in a way, the whole organisation is just too cumbersome and too much for one person to manage. And and Portia did her very best, in my opinion, and simply it was too big for her. And Michelle Phillips, I have a lot of time for as well. But I fear that the job is going to be too big for her. Admittedly, she's acting at the moment. But given where the organisation has got to, you're not just going to fix it overnight. You're not going to bring in new leadership and suddenly everything will work. The new leadership has got to say, well, what went wrong previously and what's the new strategy? How do we fix this thing? And, like trying to turn a super tank around, it doesn't happen overnight.
So what you're suggesting, now there's a leadership vacuum. I was going to ask you if that meant the right people could come in, but you're suggesting a team needs to come in. We need innovative thinking. Are those people there, and are the people positioning leaders like the Minister Gordhan understanding what's required?
My fear is no. I think that any one person that simply tries to fit into Portia Derby's shoes or Siza Mzimela is, quite frankly, taking a poison chalice. I think that you do need a team, as you suggest, and I'm not convinced that those people are within the organisation. I think that you need, professional business people who understand how to turn organizations around, and particularly to come up with a completely new plan. I don't know what that is. Maybe it is separating out the operating divisions and, having them each operate as a separate company under this new sort of so-called holding company or SOC holding company. I don't know what the answer is, and quite frankly, I'd hate to have to take it on myself. But I do believe that you need a completely different way of thinking about this organization, and you've got to look at every operating division completely separately. I think it's just a convenient sort of grouping at the moment, but it's not working, and so you've got to come up with a completely different plan, and that's not going to happen overnight.
So, last question, very quickly. There was a plan when it came to rail to give third-party access to allow private players to upgrade and maintain parts of the rail network that Transnet simply cannot afford to do. Why didn't it work?
Well, the initial, when they first went to market, it was just completely unrealistic. They offered a 2-year concession. It was taking the rail foot to its warts and all, and no one in their right mind was going to take that. And I think one person eventually might have qualified, but they then had the wrong locomotives. There's a new plan for the Gauteng container corridor, which is more of a sort of 20-year concession, and I think that might work, but it doesn't align with the National Rail Policy White Paper, which was published last year. Now, quite honestly, that is a very good policy paper, and if that could be implemented, and the sooner the better, I think that you could turn this round. But you need access to multiple third parties, not just changing one monopoly for a private monopoly, and that's what the current plan looks like. Now, it may be that within that, and when the RFP documents come out for this new rail tender, that we'll see some, a different plan on how it's going to work. But at the moment, it just looks like putting a private party in place of Transnet, and that's not going to work.